Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to talk more around two intriguing topics here in the NFL development. Before I get into the Jacksonville Jaguars and what their coach, Doug Peterson, said into next season, hoping that he gets out of them, one more time on today's show. If you have any questions or comments for me during the live show, use the tip and donations link, GSMCPodcast.net. With any of those, using the tip and donations link, I'm able to see your question pop up on air. I can read whatever you say on air, answer a question, or react to a comment. It makes it more engaging, more connected with you guys watching, and it's a big help for this show. Again, the tip and donations link is GSMCPodcast.net. We always greatly appreciate it whenever you guys are able to do that with any of your questions or comments. But like I mentioned, Doug Peterson and the Jacksonville Jaguars, probably the most impressive team to start off last season. At one point, they were one of the hottest teams to start. Like I mentioned, they looked like everything was clicking for this young team. Doug Peterson finally had them understanding his scheme. They were executing it very well. Their best players looked very good, like Travis Etienne, Trevor Lawrence. Calvin Ridley, again, was there with them. They were the number 2 seed at one point, and even the number 1 seed as well. When they beat the Texans in November to end November, they were 8-3, and they had a 98% chance to make the playoffs at that point. And then, if you didn't watch football at all, you wouldn't know. But if you even watched a sliver of the NFL towards the end of the season and kind of had an idea what was going on, the Jacksonville Jaguars really just crashed and had one of the biggest meltdowns, really, in recent history, just from what I remember. Looking at that number, 98% chance to make the playoffs, and they didn't make the playoffs. In their last 6 games, they lost 5 of them. They struggled with injuries and just really getting the running game going, which is the biggest thing that Doug Peterson pointed out. The running game and trying to get really specifically Tank Bigsby more involved. And it makes sense just because of what I mentioned, Travis Etienne. He started off very impressive, very good running attack to start the game. Everything was working off of that. We saw Etienne have success early on. He had 7 touchdowns in his first 7 weeks, averaging over 4.5 yards per carry. Then that went down, and you saw all the numbers to end it. They were 24th in the NFL in yards per game, 30th in yards per attempt. They had the 13th best scoring offense, which is impressive, but it was mostly through the pass because their passing attack was ranked in the top 10. There's no sign of the rushing attack, even of how impressive they started the year. It really fell off. As I mentioned, they finished in the bottom 10 in all categories rushing. So that's something that can't happen with Doug Peterson, the kind of coach that he is, the kind of success that he's had. You look back to his teams, the last team he had with the Philadelphia Eagles that won the Super Bowl, the 2 running backs that he had, LeGarrette Blount and Jay Ajayi, absolute monsters and workhorses. And I mentioned both of them because that's sort of the thing that he wants to get going here with Travis Etienne and Tank Bigsby. On the topic of the running attack and improving that, Doug Peterson said, we have to get Tank going. Bottom line, he's too good. He is too good. That's why we drafted him. I think early he had some, what is that type of plays, but for whatever reason, right or wrong, biggest thing to try and take burden off of Etienne. That's the biggest thing for them right now. And you saw at some point Trevor Lawrence was looking like the kind of prospect, the kind of player that was drafted number 1 overall, of how highly they talked about him. It was good to see the passing attack going. They really supported him with, like I mentioned, Calvin Ridley. Christian Kirk was a good downfield option. Evan Ingram started to become more of a reliable weapon for Trevor Lawrence. And then you go out, draft his college teammate, Travis Etienne. It looks good right now last season. Then the overuse of Travis Etienne really got the best of them. They couldn't develop any sort of chemistry, any sort of traction, momentum to build up in those last couple games where they lost a few of them. They lost leads. They couldn't really establish their offense if everyone's just dropping back, not knowing or anticipating that you're not going to run the ball or very efficiently at that. It takes a lot of the pressure off of the defense. That it takes out some of the guessing that they have to do. Stuffing the box when they have a dangerous runner really makes it obviously easier for the wide receivers. There's less people down the field, less double coverage, less zone coverage. It opens it up a lot more than maybe a lot of people realize. Doug Peterson acknowledges that, and now he has to try to get the best out of Tank Bigsby. He was an exciting player. He had some moments that were very impressive, had some solid runs, executed them very nicely, but other than that, I think he was just lost a little bit, and with a 17-week season and how it's all new for a rookie running back, when you're behind a guy like Travis Etienne who's exploding in the first couple weeks, you can understand not getting complacent because, I don't want to assume that he just didn't give or wasn't anticipating giving his best in some of the plays that he did play, but it is hard to acknowledge that, accept that role, and then still produce out there when you're not playing regularly. That's something else that I think Doug Peterson and the Jaguars would know and acknowledge that, hey, we have to do a better job of that, getting him going early like he said, spotting him some touches here or there, making sure he's in a groove, as well as including Travis Etienne as well. Etienne suffered with injuries towards the end of the year. You don't want to see more of that. So it all points right to Tank Bigsby and getting him more involved. People saw how good this offense could be. We saw a good sample size of what this could be, how impressive they were. They beat the Kansas City Chiefs, I want to say, in one of their early runs when they were on that 8-3 win-to-loss record to start the year. That's a good thing to have on your schedule, on your resume for that year, per se. It's all very impressive, but you saw the good and the bad of a young team, not really too much experience in going to the playoffs, going to sustain a long period of success over the regular season. A lot of times when you see with these younger teams, it's more of a sprint and not a marathon. They get out to a very hot start like the Jaguars do, and then they die off a little bit, whereas the good teams, like the Chiefs, start off with some questionable losses. They lose at home to the Lions, they lose to the Jaguars, and then they end up winning the Super Bowl, right? So it all has to be played out, calculated, methodical to some extent, in figuring out the dynamics of this season and getting all your best players to play to the best of their abilities. That's really what the message is here with Doug Peterson. And having that 1-2 punch is critical for any team. Not really having the 1-2 punch, but having a just solid running game. If you have one back that could do that the whole game, and the backup running back gets 5 carries the whole game or less or a little bit more, that's fine. It works for you. If that's something your lead back is able to hold up and withstand for all the weeks of the regular season, that's fine. But some teams need that 1-2 punch, need or have the talent available to go out and give 10 carries to this guy, give another 12 to the other running back, and that way it's just a lot fresher and it works for them and their scheme. It's not something I'm not saying the Jaguars should do or they have to do. Maybe they figure out Tank Bigsby isn't that running back and they can rely more on Travis Etienne. They have to try it out and see. Doug Peterson emphasized that they don't really not know what they have in Tank Bigsby, but they didn't use him as much as he would have wanted. You look at other teams like the Pittsburgh Steelers, Jaylen Warren and Najee Harris. As bad as that offense was in all the statistical categories and passing and scoring and everything like that, they had a 10-7 record. They made the playoffs. Obviously, it caught up to them in the playoffs when all the teams are very good, but you can see how having 2 running backs, 2 solid to above average running backs, can change the whole dynamic of this team. With other struggles elsewhere, it covers up a lot if you're able to control the game, play it at your pace, and then just live off of that. The Jaguars might not have one of the best defenses to complement a running game and keep the scores low, but that's something they have to address. On offense, it looks like they have everything they need compared to last season. They've only lost Calvin Ridley, and I don't say that lightly. He was their best receiver, so that's something they have to address. But to me, it's more about the defense and trying to address more holes on that defense than the one thing you need on offense. They have the quarterback. They have a good running game, like I mentioned. That can cover up not having a top 5, top 10, top 12 receiver. If you have two really good running backs, they address the offensive line as well, bringing in Mitch Morse from the Buffalo Bills, signing him to a 2-year deal. So I like the way that they're going, but I do agree with Doug Peterson. This running attack needs to get better because if Trevor Lawrence is also throwing it the whole time, he could get injured like he did last year, trying to do too much, trying to be the hero a lot, and will end up missing time, and that's good for nobody in Jacksonville. So they want to make it back to the playoffs. They had an electric win, if you remember the last time they were in it, against the Los Angeles Chargers, where they had that kind of win, that kind of comeback victory. So that's something they want to get to. I don't think Doug Peterson's the problem. They've come a long way from where they were with Urban Meyer, so they're on the right path. They just need to figure out all the struggles that come with having a young team. But anyway, we're going to leave it there, and in the meantime, we're going to move on to the last segment. There's one more to talk about after this last break. More on the Stephon Diggs trade and how it affects the Buffalo Bills going forward. Good and bad, definitely, after this trade. So don't go anywhere. One more topic to cover on here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.